In a distant and second-hand set of dimensions, in an astral plane that was never meant to fly, the curling star mists waver and part. Great Artuin the turtle comes, swimming slowly through the interstellar gulf. Through eyes that are crusted with asteroid dust, he stares fixedly at the destination. In a brain bigger than a city, with geological slowness, he thinks only of the weight. Most of the weight is accounted for by the 4 giant elephants upon whose shoulders the disc rests, garlanded by the long waterfall at its vast circumference. This is the Discworld.
In 1987, a man armed with nothing more than a hat, a beard and a typewriter wrote a book. It was a book about a wizard, a book about death, a book about insurance, bar brawls and the first ever tourist. It was called The Colour of Magic, and it was the first Discworld novel. And now, 14 years, 26 books and 2,148 bottles of wine later, this man is known globally. He is, of course, Mr. Terry Pratchett, OBE.
I came up with the idea, I suppose, in the early 80s when there was a huge fantasy boom. And there was a lot of bad fantasy around. There was some good stuff, but there was a lot of cliched fantasy, and I thought it was about time to have some fun with it, pretty much in the same way that Douglas Adams had some fun with science fiction in the mid-70s. So it began as a simple parody of both the good and the bad fantasy that was around, and then it just kept going and became sort of fantasy in its own right. I like doing it. The reward to myself for finishing a book, and finishing a book is always a tedious business, is to be allowed to start another one, so the cycle goes round and round and round. Stephen Briggs phoned me up and said he'd like to make a play of, I think it was Weird Sisters. And I said, I think you're completely insane, but yeah, fine, sure, let me come along.
Terry came to see Weird Sisters.
And they did, and it was good, and people laughed, and they had an audience, you know, kind of people that they didn't normally get. And so they said, can we try more? I said, yeah, fine, wonderful, lovely. And so it went on.
At the time, he was just in the beginning of discussions about a film of Mort, which, as it turns out, hasn't happened and is still in sort of, production hell. But I said to him, it's a real pity you're going to do this film of Mort, because we just had this experience with Tom Sharp, and I guess it'll all be embargoed, and we won't be able to do it as a play. And he said, no. He said, if you want to do it, you do it. What difference is a group of amateurs doing a play in a 90-seater theatre going to make to any kind of international film? So he said, go ahead and do it. So we started doing Mort.
And this kind of a friendship has built up, and yeah, that's it. It's always been, like most things in my life, it was completely unplanned. It just happened.
And I just emailed him and said, here's an idea you might want to run away with. Why don't you do a Discworld companion? I'm sure there's enough stuff there now for you to have one. I hadn't got any idea of writing it, and he just came back and said, are you suggesting you ought to do it? And I sort of stopped and thought, well, I've got no idea at all what's involved in indexing a large series of books. But I thought, this is obviously one of those big decisions. So I said, yeah, I'll have a go. And he said, if you do it, it's not having a go. It's got to be done properly, because if you don't do it properly, it'll kill it stone dead for the publishers. But, he said, I'd like to start by mapping Ankh-Morpork. And
I forget stuff, and I rely on him to tell me. In fact, the current manuscript is with him, and I've said, look, just check that I'm doing it right. I think I am. If someone goes along this street and they turn the corner, do they end up in that street? It looks to me that's how it is.
Terry was just around and used to listen to Radio Bristol, and he really liked the kind of humour that I was presenting, and then later on, when he saw the kind of things that I was doing on the television, he became a bit of an aficionado, just as I was of him. And so when the idea came up for Random House to put the books on tape, they asked him who would be his choice, and he said me, which is just one of the most flattering things that's ever happened to me.
And now we come to the part of the show where we look at your top 6.5 Discworld characters.
The Grim Squeaker! Yay!
It's a little creature that comes up when death decides to retire, and all the death in the world has to try and find its own identity, and the death of rats it's just made out of the minds of rats, what rats think death looks like.
He was created for a specific plot reason, and then I had this picture of the tiny little robe and the little bony nose coming up, which was instantly a funny image.
He's like Death's pet, isn't he? He's funny. I'd love to have a little pet death rat. That'd be funny. He's cool.
Grebo is Nanny Ogg's cat. It's a grey ball of fluff. It's evil, bloody-minded little thing that is just nasty.
Oh, you have to love Grebo, don't you?
Oh, Grebo. the evil cat. Evil cat with one eye.
There's nothing special about Grebo. I think he got a lot of extra fans when he developed the power to turn into a human being in states of emergency.
Seems to be linked to almost every generation of cats in the entire Ramtop Mountains. But Nanny Ogg doesn't see him 40 years.
I have a friend like Nanny Ogg. She's lovely.
When you suddenly get to a bit of a book and you realise that she's there, you kind of go a bit, don't you? Even though you know that she would be a terror if she was in the same room as you.
Too many children, but somehow seems to be just muddling through life and just generally having a good time, even though she's getting on a bit.
Probably one of the most lewd characters on the Discworld, really.
You actually need to drink a bottle or two to think like Nanny Ogg.
The librarian, I believe he's a monkey or a gorilla.
But he hates being called a monkey. If he gets called a monkey, he just gets stressed out and starts attempting to kill people.
Okay, he's an ape. That's right, yeah, he beats people up. Called him a monkey.
Oh, what a great moment that was when I came up with him. I just wanted something funny to turn a librarian into.
Orangutan. Yay!
I like the librarian. The librarian's good fun. I think it's a really interesting and fun concept to have a librarian that's a primate.
He's just a really violent ape living in the library.
Plus, he's kind of cuddly.
Rincewind is one of the wizards. He's not the brightest wizard on the Discworld, I believe.
Who spells wizard? W-I-Z-Z-A-R-D. Please. He's just a silly character.
Gets things a little wrong occasionally and tends to screw up.
But he seems to be the most important wizard out of anyone I can see.
His job is to meet weird and interesting characters as he usually runs away from situations. He's a useful character to have around, but he's not one that I personally rate very highly. I've
never really got Rincewind totally. I mean, for most people, he's the character who started off the Discworld series. He's the character that got them into it in the first place.
Rincewind is a top geezer. What can I tell you about Rincewind? I think he probably lives in this flat. The luggage is like my videotape recorder. It can consume everything. It's totally remorseless.
It's just this chest with loads of kind of legs, and it just seems to be indestructible, and it just follows him around.
What I don't like about luggage is he's a real bugger to try and do on stage.
They're quite cute because people just get really, really scared by them, like, whoa, what's that?
Travel accessory. Rincewind and the luggage have become sort of icons for the whole series. In fact, they don't feature very much. People like the luggage because it has no rules. It just attacks things and you don't know what it's thinking, and it creeps up behind people, and it's more or less indestructible, and I think people enjoy that.
Tends to eat people that it doesn't like and follows Rincewind everywhere. It's very cute. I could do with one of those because I'm constantly leaving my luggage everywhere.
He's a great character, and he turned up in Colour of Magic just for the purposes of a joke.
Death is this huge 8-foot skeleton in a black cloak with a huge scythe that rides his white horse called Binky.
It was the first thing that really attracted me to Discworld, was this concept of a 7-foot talking skeleton that looked like the medieval version of Death, but liked curry and cats and cared about people and was confused about what he was doing.
It's just so outrageous. That's all. Just, you don't expect Death to have a personality, and he's like got family problems and that, and it's just really silly.
The fact that he can't quite understand human beings and is constantly trying to find out what makes them tick is also interesting, because this is not the Death we've been led to expect.
But no one's kind of characterised Death as this kind of lonely man doing this kind of day-to-day grueling job.
One of the things that Terry does best, and it probably comes from the fact that he worked as a journalist for such a long time, is he's very good about people and their jobs, particularly men and their jobs. And there was something I think very inspiring about the fact that he saw death not in terms of some great metaphysical power, but someone who is lumbered with the crappiest job in the whole world. It's always impossible to tell precisely why a series is as popular as it is. If we knew that, we'd all be millionaires.
Because it has depth, because it has a sound but not overstated moral background to it, because right always triumphs, because the characters are real rather than just being stereotypes.
Every time I finish a book and it goes out and it gets to #1, I think, wow, I've got away with it one more time, and just maybe there'll come a time when I don't.
I think it's just because he's better than the vast majority of other fantasy writers.
There was an article in the Daily Telegraph at the end of last year saying Terry Pratchett sells so well because all his fans are 14-year-old boys called Kevin. And I mentioned this at a literary festival I went to, and this elderly lady with white hair in the front row stood up and said, "I'd like to announce that I am Kevin." And someone else stood up and said, "No, I am Kevin." And one bloke, bless him, who knew exactly how it should go, stood up and said, "No, I am Kevin, and so is my wife."
Orangutans, failed wizards, drunken witches, suspicious sausages and a bun. Despite the anti-fantasy prejudices of the publishing world and the literary press, Discworld has gone on to become one of the world's great success stories. I don't suppose we'll ever know how that truly happened. Perhaps it's the beard. But I think we can safely say that so long as Terry Pratchett keeps on writing, the Discworld will keep getting more and more popular until, who knows, one day it might actually exist.